How do pro-choice advocates use language to shame you away from criticizing their position? Welcome to Pro-Life Thinking, a podcast that trains you how to defend the pro-life position effectively and persuasively. I'm your host, Clinton Wilcox, and I'm joined, I'm not joined today. Oh, hold on just a moment. Oh, I had some echo going on in my headphones. So I'm not joined by my co-host Nathan today. He's actually getting a new job with the police force in Escondido, and so he's actually going on a ride along today. Obviously he couldn't join in the conversation from the side of a police car, but wish him the best in that. And incidentally, Nathan actually is going to be getting a new job with the police in Escondido, and so I believe he starts officially in April, and so he's going to basically not be co-hosting the podcast with me anymore, or at least not on a regular basis. So the question is, should I go ahead and proceed on my own, or should I maybe find someone to take over for Nathan once he goes? That's a question I've been considering for the past week or so, and I will come to a decision. But if any of my listeners have any thoughts on that, if you prefer a podcast hosted by one person, or if you prefer the interaction between two people, feel free to give me your thoughts and weigh in on that discussion. You can weigh in there on our podcast page on Facebook, and we also have one on MeWe as well. If you happen to subscribe to our page there on MeWe or on Facebook, feel free to weigh in on that decision, or you can even just send me an email at prolifethinking@gmail.com, because I do want to make sure I want this podcast to appeal to as many people as possible. And so I absolutely do want to, if my listeners have any thoughts on that, absolutely feel free to send those along. Now, my guest for today is Dr. Debbie Garratt, who actually lives in Australia, and incidentally is my first guest from Australia. So I'm excited to have her here as a guest. And now, Debbie, unfortunately, I couldn't locate a bio for you. So if you wouldn't mind, just maybe go ahead and tell everyone, what it is you do.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Clinton. That's my mistake for not sending you something.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
I've got a relatively diverse background across adult education, counselling, and health sectors. So I've got a number of degrees in those different areas. For the last almost 20 years, I've been Executive Director of a national not-for-profit, Real Choices Australia, which educates about mental health aspects of abortion and coercion related to abortion as well. I also have a private practice as a clinical nurse consultant in providing sort of counselling for generalist counselling across the board. So I've got a finger in a few different things over the years. I've got grown children and a number of grandchildren, so a bit more time on my hands at the moment.
Oh, nice. Well, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you here with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this episode will have the audio extracted and will make its way onto our audio-only podcast. But if you're watching the live broadcast and we'll be engaging in the live chat, I'll post relevant comments and even questions that you have for our guests on the video screen. Now, I've asked Debbie here to talk about a book she published recently called Alarmist Gatekeeping: Abortion. Now, this is, of course, a topic that I haven't really heard it framed as alarmist gatekeeping before. That's, I think, probably unique to Debbie here. But the whole idea about how pro-choice people use language to affect the abortion debate has long been a topic of discussion. There have been some books written about it, like a book I have here on my dresser, Dehumanizing the Vulnerable, which talks about the way that word games have been used to dehumanize other groups of people, like the Jews during the Holocaust, Black people during chattel slavery in the United States, and all sorts of different things. And so Debbie, if I'm not mistaken, this concept of alarmist gatekeeping was a dissertation that you had written for your college, and then you published as a book. Is that correct?
That's right. So alarmist gatekeeping is the name of the theory I developed as part of my PhD, which was finished a couple of years back. And then the book is really the public version of that thesis. So it looked at the discourse, the public discourse, the generally accepted common discourse around abortion, and was an examination and an analysis of that in the end. That's how the research ended up. So develop this kind of framework for how that works and how people are recruited to a particular position, that is one of abortion advocacy, a lot through a process of disinformation and the use of language, etc., and alarmist kinds of rhetoric, but also the way in which it makes people fearful of speaking against the discourse. So the other side is this gatekeeping aspect of what is allowed to be spoken, what happens to people who dissent from that position, and it happens in a very public way. So, the discrediting processes that occur to people and how it all works together to create this very powerful atmosphere of, fear and silence and everyone towing the line.
Yeah, so we'll get to your book in just a moment. The first thing that I like to ask all of the guests that come on here, just to kind of get to know you a little bit, is why are you pro-life? What was kind of the situations, or what kind of led up to your becoming pro-life?
I was about to say I don't particularly even talk about myself as being pro-life. I've certainly when I began my work in this field, I didn't ideologically align. I suppose if I was to reflect on it, I would say perhaps I was pro-choice, but it wasn't an ideological discussion for me. It was a matter of, in the very early days, even prior to Real Choices Australia, the recognition that women and particular mothers were often lacking in different supportive options. So, and that came a little bit from my experience as a teen mother. So I'd had two children I had my first baby at 17, two children by the time I was 21, raised my children as a single mother until my mid-30s when I married. And there was this kind of rhetoric around how having children young was going to ruin your lives. Well, was going to ruin your life. You couldn't possibly do it. And yet my experience is, yes, it was hard. It came with challenges. However, if women are appropriately supported, of course it can happen. And so I kind of objected to this idea that women were incapable of doing these things, or that they should do them alone and without support. And so my work moving into the field of educating even about abortion harm was more about the recognition amongst my friends and colleagues that whilst abortion was seen to be a benign choice for women, that's not what I was witnessing. I was witnessing lots of coercive factors around that issue. And, even today, I don't see certainly my developed thesis and my work, I don't see as pro-life. I see as what should be the mainstream thinking. I see that all of the issues I've raised from through my thesis should concern people on both sides of the ideological fence.
Okay, so then your book isn't necessarily one that supports the pro-life view per se. It's more just kind of raising awareness of the way that the topic is discussed, and something that you think pro-choice people could benefit from as well as pro-life people.
Oh, look, and I know pro-choice people are benefiting from it because I've already had that feedback where people who are pro-choice who have said, well, yeah, I can see how if I step off that, very fine line that I would be, discredited. And I talk a bit about that in my book, how pro-choice people who may have failed to toe the line completely, who may express concerns around very late-term abortion, or who may suggest that perhaps coercion is involved in abortion in even some circumstances, who are very, very quickly, struck off the abortion advocacy side and told their dissenters, and there's really no coming back from that. So it is important it's an important work for everybody, I think.
Yeah, and I follow you on Twitter, and one of the things I know you for is in your interactions with abortionists on social media, such as Leah Torres. Would you say that these abortionists that you engage in also engage in the alarmist gatekeeping that you're warning about in your book?
Oh, there's no question. And, in fact, it was a rich source of data for me during my PhD. Things such as, and I guess, Leah Torres is quite rampant in this area, but statements such as pregnancy kills, which I've even seen put out in media publication. Well, yes, absolutely, pregnancy can come with some risks. However, driving your car, we could, start saying, well, driving a car kills because so many people are killed driving a car. That's alarmist language. The idea and the positioning from which some abortion advocates come is that because pregnancy can come with some risk, every abortion is medically indicated. And not only is that alarmist disinformation, and it can be very frightening for some women who are ambivalent about pregnancy. It's not only false, it's also a huge manipulation of the experience that isn't transferable to, that they would argue isn't transferable to other areas either.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Torres actually had originally put out, it seemed like she was trying to offer an olive branch, saying, hey, if you're pro-life, I want to get to know you. Let's have some video discussions where we can cordially discuss each other's views, get to know each other. And I had taken her up on that, but it seems that lately she kind of did a complete 180 and now spends most of her time berating pro-life people on Twitter. And I was wondering if I don't know, do you have like some kind of thoughts about why she would have made such a drastic change?
I do have thoughts about that. I don't want to kind of be psychoanalyzing the person who's not in the room. Generally speaking, though, I think that we need to be very cautious about how we judge even the strongest abortion advocates. And I think that was something that comes out very clearly in my in my work, is that people are very invested in this positioning. People get the same message from a huge variety of sources over a lifetime. And when someone is invested in abortion as being a good in some way, that's a strongly held value that has often formed the basis of some of their actions over time. So someone like Dr. Torres, who performs abortions, that's at one end. At the other end, you've got women who've had abortions. You've got people who looked after someone's children while their friend went for an abortion. You've got someone who told someone, oh yes, I'm pro-choice, abortion is fine. All of that is an investment in abortion being a good. So when there is a confrontation against that, when someone says, well, actually abortion can cause harm, or maybe a better example is actually one that I used in my book, where we had a situation here in Australia where there was a woman with twins. One of the twins had a heart condition, so late in pregnancy they decided to terminate one twin and just deliver the other. The wrong twin was terminated, and it made these huge headlines in our country, and people were outraged. Wrong baby, terminated, etc. And then what they did was deliver the other baby and terminate its life as well. Now, there was not a lot of information about how that came about. What struck me at that time was the outrage of the public, who were very upset that a healthy baby was terminated at 32 weeks of pregnancy. Yet in our country, many hundreds of babies, healthy babies, are terminated post viability. But if people hear that bit of information, it is so horror-filled that they don't want to accept it. So if you've ever said, oh yes, I'm pro-choice, I think abortion should be available, then you hear someone say, well, actually, there's many hundreds of late-term abortions of healthy babies, of healthy mothers that could be delivered. They go, no, that can't possibly be right. That information is quickly followed by, well, actually, that's really not true. And all these people are trying to just manipulate you. And of course, late-term abortions only occur in the setting of when a mother's going to die. And the person whose values have been impinged kind of goes, oh, phew, thank goodness. Because that would have been so horrible if that thing was true. And they fall back into feeling comfortable again. So we have to be very conscious of that these very powerful messages that people get over a long period of time, that abortion is benign, that in late-term abortion only occurs when women are about to die, that anything that is said to the contrary is designed to manipulate you or make you feel awful and undermine women and put them back in their kitchens. And so that point of discomfort where someone hears a truth that makes them uncomfortable is a very difficult one for people to move through when they're invested in abortion. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, definitely. What's the abortion situation like in Australia?
In Australia, abortion is decriminalised really for the most part almost to birth in most of our states. We have around 85,000 abortions a year. We've got a population of around 24 million, I think. So it's commensurate with the abortion rate in the United States, for example. So here in my state of Victoria, there are around between 300 and 400 post 20-week abortions a year. Many of those are post 28 weeks, which is, good viability stage. And around half of those are of healthy babies and healthy mothers. So for some sort of psychosocial reason. We also have laws that in almost every state now that mean there is no right to a conscientious objection, in the sense that if you are a conscientious objector, if you're a medical practitioner with a conscientious objection to abortion, you are legally obliged to refer on to someone who isn't a conscientious objector or to refer women to abortion. The guidelines around that from medical associations tell doctors that if you object to abortion and a woman starts talking to you about pregnancy, the safest thing for you to do is immediately refer her. So what it does is it cuts out this whole population of people who are maybe the only ones who would inform women about their particular risk factors, etc. We also have what's called in most states safe access zones, which even the name itself kind of suggests that if a pro-life person's outside an abortion clinic, they're a danger to a woman. So it's now illegal to even talk about abortion within between 50 and 150 metres, depending on what state you're in, of an abortion clinic, let alone offer help or any of those things. So, and most of this legislation is really driven by it's driven by disinformation and by fear.
Yeah, our American Constitution guarantees a doctor's right to conscientiously object to certain procedures like abortion or euthanasia, those kinds of things. But we're very quickly possibly moving in a direction to where that might come to an end. There's been a lot of news, for example, of Joe Biden, our new president, who is bringing on Xavier Becerra to his cabinet. And Becerra is a well-known opponent of pro-life organizations. In fact, he's actually tried to force pro-life organizations like pregnancy care centers to refer out for abortions. So, if President Biden and his cabinet get their way, we actually might be moving in that same direction also.
Yes, absolutely. And, the idea that, there's this kind of, well, it's incongruence everywhere, but there's this incongruence between women are or autonomous, sensible, intelligent, professional, independent beings who can choose what they want for themselves, on the one hand, from an abortion advocacy position, and on the other side, but pro-life centres are going to manipulate them and confuse them and, as though they're kind of weak and vulnerable at the same time. So,
right.
Again, there's that constant dissonance between, we put forward whatever supports our position on that particular day.
Yeah. Now, your book, Alarmist Gatekeeping, Abortion, I did put out an order for it on Amazon, but unfortunately it wasn't available for Prime shipping, I'm assuming because it's shipping out of Australia. So unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy that I can show anyone, but there we go. Yeah, I would definitely encourage, people to go out and pick it up. My acquaintance on Facebook, Zach Schmoll, picked up a copy, said it was very thought-provoking, and I'm a few chapters into it now, and yeah, actually a lot of it that I've been reading, actually a lot of it pertains to the United States as well. So if you're an American listener, this book will definitely be very helpful for you in understanding the way that the debate is framed, even here in the United States as well. Now, the term alarmist gatekeeping, I've heard the term gatekeeping before. I think it's usually used in the context of like an abusive relationship of a husband to his wife or something like that. How does the concept of alarmist gatekeeping relate to that kind of thing? Is it similar, or is alarmist gatekeeping a little bit different?
Well, the gatekeeping. So alarmist gatekeeping is my term. It's the name of my theory, and it came out of these two sides of my the two things that are going on. One is alarmist recruitment. So it's the way in which abortion advocacy language recruits people to the cause. Women will die if they don't have access to abortion. It's a human right that women should have access to abortion. You believe in the equality of women, don't you? So it's all these women can't be equal if they don't have this, and with lots of alarmist stuff around it. And the perspective gatekeeping, which is the other side of censorship. So it's about controlling the language, controlling how language is allowed to be used, who's allowed to speak, what gets into the media, what is taught in universities. And so alarmist gatekeeping came from that. So gatekeeping is kind of, this concept of who holds the power to determine who's allowed in and who's allowed out, and who's in control and what can be said as part of that. What's been really interesting is that a number of overseas researchers in particular have taken this concept, this theory of alarmist gatekeeping, and applied it to their own settings and said, wow, this is what's happening in my work around the gendered narrative of domestic violence, or this is what's happening in gender ideology. That's one where this seems to really apply as well. So it may be that the theory itself has more general application to ideological issues that are dominant in the discourse. So that was exciting to see that people could read about it and go, wow, this is really working as an application to the work that I'm doing as well.
Yeah, in fact, on the Facebook comment from Zach, he actually says that you do a good job outlining the topic, but your methodology can actually apply to just about any social issue. And I think that's what you were just talking about regarding things like the transgender discussion and things like that.
Correct. And the similar strategies are utilised. So, certainly in the gender ideology, we have language around, young people are killing themselves, if they can't, take these paths. And then on the other side, you're not allowed. And of course, the changing of language, and particularly the erasing of women from language, using chest feeding instead of breastfeeding,
Right.
Those kinds of things, pregnant persons instead of pregnant women, which is, kind of creeping in to our language and being endorsed by major bodies, along with this kind of, if you speak against this dominant discourse, you're discredited. People lose jobs for speaking against it. So again, it's the same principles at play.
Yeah, and a major part of what you write about in the book is about the disinformation that they use. And something that I was thinking about is we actually have examples of social media, for example, Facebook and Twitter, who have actually been using their own what they call fact checkers to fact check these articles and things that people post to their social media platforms. And they call these things disinformation, even if the information presented inside is actually correct. Is that sort of along the same lines of the tactics, by calling correct information, labeling it disinformation in order to deceive people into their point of view?
Absolutely, it is, yes. And the thing that is interesting when you do enter into these discussions on these important issues is that I think that I manage social media very, very well and offer evidence and offer links. And, even then, even when you offer the evidence, people, what happens is people tend to very quickly resort to insult. So, there's a way to manage that. And I think it's really important to always remember there are always, probably for every one person who's insulting you and discrediting you, there may be 10 people or 100 people who are simply watching the conversation and gathering information. So it's always really important to not engage in that kind of back and forth demeaning and discrediting stuff, but put your information out there, be polite, exit when it's apparent that this person is really only interested in baiting you. But of course, even that has huge risks. We've had a doctor here deregistered because he spoke his personal views around same-sex marriage and around abortion. He's never had a patient complaint. It's nothing to do with his professional practice, but certainly in Australia, this is what's happening. So you do, even no matter how careful you are, how much evidence base you put out there, the power of the dominant view is huge. And this fact-checking thing, of course, I think I wrote an article, I don't know if it's on my own blog or maybe on my Real Choices Australia blog, of fact-checking the fact-checkers when they fact-checked something that I had put out and they were completely wrong. But people don't get that far. To some extent, people are a bit lazy and they just want their own view reinforced. So if someone says this is disinformation, they go, oh, okay, good, I don't have to worry about it.
Right. Yeah. In fact, you mentioned something called the illusory truth effect, where someone believes something just because they've heard it repeated many times, even if they've never actually verified it for themselves. And that's the sort of thing you're talking about, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. The more often we hear a message from more different places, the more likely we are to believe it and simply fall back on it, whether it's true or not. We're less likely to even investigate it. And sometimes it takes it's either a unique kind of person who constantly wants to have their knowledge challenged, which is kind of where I sit. And this is why I'm open to abortion advocacy discussions as well. I want to have my views questioned. I want to be challenged. I want to be open to new information all the time on all of these issues. But for most people, we believe what we believe. And I think in my book, I also talk about a researcher called Rigotti talked about the manipulated make the best manipulators. And by that, I mean that if there is someone who puts some disinformation out, particularly if we see it face to face or see a video, states an untruth. There are certain things that as human beings we can see about a person when they're being deceptive. However, we've got whole generations of people who have already been manipulated by the disinformation to the extent that they believe it to be true. So if I am one of the people who believe it to be true and I speak it, it's easier for me to manipulate other people because there's no signs in me that I'm being dishonest. So, and that's what we're dealing with is, whole swaths of people who simply believe, this idea that women can't be equal without abortion. Women will die if we don't have abortion availability. No abortions occur. And look, and I've seen abortion providers put statements out saying abortions simply do not ever occur after 20 weeks unless in the setting of life-threatening circumstances. We have government statistics that simply show that not to be true. So when that occurs, I'm kind of thinking, is this someone who simply never looked? Have they never come across this circumstance? Or why would they be invested in putting these lies out to the public that reduce women's access to information from an informed consent process?
Yeah, that's actually a very common one, even here in the United States, that late-term abortions almost never happen. And when they do, it's because of some kind of medical issue that, the pregnancy was life-threatening or the fetus had some kind of, fatal ailment or something like that. And I came across an article that you'd written. I think it was before your book was coming out, where you talked a little bit about alarmist gatekeeping theory and development. Where you mentioned that. And I also have a link to an article by Secular Pro-Life, which both kind of rebut this idea. So I posted both of those in the show notes as well. So if anyone's listening and wants some more information on that, there are a couple of links there that talk more about how this just isn't true, about what they say about late-term abortion. Another common claim that's even made now that I can think of is a claim that Bernard Nathanson made in his book Aborting America, where the kind of the common knowledge of the abortion issue is that thousands of women, 5,000 to 10,000 women died from illegal abortions before 1973. And Nathanson in his book just basically said, look, that claim is totally bogus. We knew it was false when we were arguing for abortion, but in the morality of our revolution, why let simple facts get in the way of what we're trying to pass legally. So that's another common claim that's even made today. When, if you really think about it, it's really kind of absurd to think that many women are dying from illegal abortions.
Look, the fact is, pre-legalization of abortion is most abortion was done illegally by medical practitioners, not in these horrid ways. And in fact, we're heading toward more. I think I call my chapter on medical abortion, backyard abortion, because we're heading down that pathway again of saying, well, women can just go home and take a pill. They don't even need to see a doctor. We should just make this freely available. And yet medical abortion is an absolutely horrendous process for many, if not the majority of women. This idea that women will, in the current numbers, still seek abortion and have backyard terrible abortions just simply has no basis in reality. Some people have said to me, I have on occasion had the comment that, if abortion became illegal tomorrow, that would be a terrible thing for women. And my argument to that is twofold. One, if in fact abortion was made illegal tomorrow and that meant that it would be terrible for women because they wouldn't be able to continue their pregnancies, what does that say about what this idea of abortion-focused feminism did for women? If it didn't change the world enough to give them options, what does that mean? And then I also say, actually, and that is true, yes, in some ways, if abortion became unavailable tomorrow, we'd have young women having to leave universities because there'd be no childcare and no flexible learning. We'd have women losing jobs. We'd have, more and more women finding themselves on welfare and unable to cope. We'd have more unsupported women. What does that say about our world? That says more about how we support women and their unique needs than it does about abortion. The fact that abortion advocates recognise this, but they recognise it in a different way, because they would still argue that abortion is an act of freedom and autonomy. I argue it's an act of, for the most part, it's an act born out of a lack of resources and having your back to the wall. We know that most women access abortion because they lack support or resourcing. It's the same reasons, and here's another contentious kind of topic where I find myself on the opposite side of a lot of pro-life people. It's the same reason women lose children to adoption, because they lack support and resources. And we're undermining women and their capacity when pro-life people argue, actually don't have an abortion, we'll just find a family for your baby instead. We're still saying to a woman, A, you have no capacity, and B, we recognise your lack of resources, so we'll just give your baby to someone with more resources. We're still not doing the thing that women need. We're still not saying, actually, why should a woman and her child lose each other because of a lack of support and resources? That's a whole other issue that I think needs a lot of education, particularly amongst the pro-life community, what that does in terms of undermining women.
Well, I believe in the free exchange of ideas, so I'm certainly not opposed to letting you speak your mind if you believe something in opposition to the larger pro-life movement. So I appreciate you, giving your thoughts. And you made a really great point about the interactions that we had, and that we should continue to have these interactions, because even if the person that we're talking to is belligerent and calling you names and all these kinds of things, it's the people who are actually watching our interactions that we might be able to reach. And if we remain calm while the other side is being belligerent and insulting and these kinds of things, they'll be able to recognize which side has the stronger arguments just based on how they interact with each other.
Absolutely. And I know that this happens because I've had a number over the years, not a huge number, but enough to encourage me. I will get a private message, for example, from someone who says, look, actually, I don't agree with you particularly, but I'm really glad you've put the evidence out there and I'll read it. And I'm really sorry that so-and-so was so rude to you. So we know that they're out there, and we know that everything we put out on social media may come back to bite us at some point in time. So we need to be cautious with our words. Certainly there are some posts or tweets I've put out that have been used in a way to try and discredit me, because they'll be taken out of context or they might be a bit misconstrued, and I read it and go, oh, yeah, okay, I need to be a bit more careful about that wording. It all needs to be very clear, because sometimes it isn't and can be misconstrued. So that's really important as well. If you're going to talk about these issues on social media, learn how to use language appropriately. Be kind. The thing I taught my children and my grandchildren goes on social media as well. Be kind and use your manners.
Yeah, mind your P's and Q's, as my mom used to say.
Yes.
Yeah. So another thing you mentioned, which I'd like to follow up on here, is the fact that the dominant side does tend to keep information from women. And this is something that I see, especially when it comes to trying to pass what pro-life people think are just common sense legislation, but pro-choice people see them as an affront and a direct assault on their right to pursue abortion. Just things that, that might end up persuading some women away from abortion. Things like requiring that they see an ultrasound before they consent to having an abortion, or making sure that the doctor presents all of the medical facts about the development of their child to the woman. Those kinds of things where, at least in the United States, I'm sure it's probably the same in Australia, considering the topic of your book, but they try to keep these things away from women, because they do see it as an assault on women's rights, but they also think that, I guess, even if they don't say this outright, it kind of seems like they think that women are just too inherently weak to consider all of the information, where they think it'll be psychologically stressful on the woman instead of helping her to maybe think twice about the abortion that she's considering having.
And, that's another example of the dissonance here. Women are strong and free and autonomous and can have abortions whenever they feel like it because they're independently making up their mind and acting out their freedom, versus they're so weak and vulnerable that hearing information about the development of a fetus, or seeing an ultrasound, or hearing that, 1 in 10 women suffer serious prolonged mental health harm after abortion, and they might be one of them, or they might have some risk factors. We kind of think you can't have it both ways, but they do have it both ways. There is a withholding of that kind of information because it threatens rights. And, I've got some powerful quotes in my book from abortion advocates as well, from research done in the abortion industry around how all of this doesn't only silence, and that was the most disturbing thing to me, that the power of this discourse silences all of us in different ways. It silences doctors. Where do women get the information, even about their individual personal risk of mental health harm, for example, if their own doctor isn't allowed to give it because they're a conscientious objector, and or even if they're not, they might in fact get into trouble for giving out this information. They're not going to get it from an abortion provider. They can't, if they see it in the general public, it's quickly refuted by people who say, you can't listen to that, it's not true. So women don't get this information from anywhere. They don't get it from but even abortion providers and people who work in the abortion field are silenced. So there's this kind of blanket of silence. No one's allowed to say anything because it might threaten rights. And many abortion advocates and people who work in that field say this. So there's good referencing in my book where I get a lot of this information from, and some great articles where they've done focus groups on abortion workers who talk about the silencing within their own industry, where they say, well, we can't really talk about that because it might impact rights. And that's where this whole thing of alarmist gatekeeping is around protecting a right that is so separate from the experiences of, or whether that right is actually lived out becomes irrelevant. The right must be available. The right to abortion must exist at any time for any woman in any place for any circumstance. And we can't talk about the pressures that women might experience because it might threaten that right. That's where it's no longer a right. If something is no longer in actual, just an option from genuinely supported options, it's not a right.
Yeah. Okay. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, because I just got a notification that the Wi-Fi might be a little spotty. At least on StreamYard, it gave me a notification. The Wi-Fi indicator on my laptop is full, so I'm not. It might have been just an issue with StreamYard, but yeah. Okay, so you mentioned about a doctor who had essentially lost his job because of something some unpopular view that he had said publicly about his views on gender. I think he said it was, and that's colloquially that kind of thing has become known as cancel culture, where if you just express something that's an unpopular view, or even if you just said something 10 years ago, it can be dredged up and you can face repercussions for it, even if you don't believe that any longer. And yes. so that would actually, what we know as cancel culture now would actually just be another way of framing this concept of alarmist gatekeeping. Is that correct?
Well, it's kind of an explanation for one half of my theory. So it ignores we've got alarmist recruitment, which isn't really part of cancel culture. What's part of cancel culture is this perspective gatekeeping. It's who decides what's allowed to be said and what we do to people who dissent. That fits cancel culture. So the added bit that my theory kind of fills out or adds to that is this how we drew people in the first place. And how we manipulate so many minds and the process through which that happens.
Give me just one moment real quick. I've got a dog that wants to go out. Okay, go on. There we go. She sometimes likes to horn in and get a cameo appearance on the podcast. Okay, so regarding the things that you talk about here in your book, what are some things that we can do to kind of look out for this alarmist gatekeeping, and maybe some ways in which we can kind of push back and try to make headway toward not only getting resources to women who need it, but also just making headway. Like if we're pro-life and we want to make headway on at least getting it to where we can at least have a discussion about abortion, what kinds of things can we do to kind of push back against this alarmist gatekeeping that's going on?
I think the first thing is to recognize it. I think recognizing the different elements at play, recognizing what the difference, I guess, between even something as small as recognizing the difference between disinformation and misinformation. So disinformation is a direct lie. This person actually knows or should know the truth and is deceiving you. Misinformation is someone else who just repeats that. So, recognizing that the majority of what's out there is misinformation. It's people who've read something or heard something and believed it, and therefore may actually be open to some different information. I also think treading really carefully around these discussions is so important, because so many people have been directly or indirectly impacted by abortion. And we don't do people, like women who've had post-abortive women are very marginalised by abortion advocacy. We don't want to hear about how women have been harmed, and we silence them. They're also very silenced by the pro-life community. A simple statement like, I don't even know how a woman could have an abortion. If you say that to a group of women, 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 of whom have had abortions, it's an immediately judgmental statement. I know how women could have an abortion. I've been in a place where I have felt like my back's against a wall and I've not supported, maybe in different circumstances. When I was 17 and pregnant, the thing that saved me from having an abortion and, means I now have, a grown daughter who has 4 children was my rebellion. That's what got me pregnant, and it's what saved me from abortion. I wasn't having an abortion. I was having a baby, in the face of everyone telling me what else I was doing. So I absolutely know how women could have abortions. I speak to women who are considering abortion. I've spoken to post-abortive women. I hear the pressures that are on them, and not just their personal pressures, but I also now, when you read the book and you understand the pervasiveness of this messaging, it gives us a better understanding of how women see abortion as something more normalised, and maybe almost something that if they have internal conflict about it, it's a weakness of themselves. It's not real. And so we get a better understanding. And I think the pro-life community does need to develop that, a better understanding of the pressures, not just in that woman's personal environment, but more broadly speaking, and the real lack of supports. If a 22-year-old who's at university and struggling and has to work in order to pay for her fees and is pregnant, the reality is she may have to leave university and, sit at home and, well, that's her reality. What are we doing about that? But what are we doing about it, not just for abortion-minded women, but for all women? I'm a very big advocate that pro-life centres need to stop trying to target abortion-minded women, and we need to get out in our communities and create real cultural change for all women, because the majority of women struggle at some point during a pregnancy. Why aren't we putting these supports out for everyone, even women who don't consider abortion? Because then we begin to change the culture on these small community levels, as opposed to only targeting women who seek abortion. It's not only women who seek abortion who needs our support.
Yeah. Now, considering that the pro-life view is not the one that's the dominant view, is the pro-choice view, when a pro-life person says something like that, is that still considered a form of alarmist gatekeeping, or is that something that's kind of different?
Alarmist gatekeeping is a theory of the dominant discourse. So now, in this context, it's the dominant discourse nationally and internationally. So it's of the big and what dominates the discourse is abortion advocacy. So it's a theory of that. However, it can also fit in smaller communities of dominant discoursing. So, one of the early researchers who read my work talked about how actually this theory describes a cult really, really well. We put fear into people to recruit them in, and we discredit them and cut them off and ostracize them for moving out. So it's a theory that can apply to the dominant discoursing of a smaller community as well. We could argue that, in some pro-life communities, this might apply. If you, and look, I've seen this happen. I've seen this happen to me. I've been ostracized by the pro-life community because I work from a women-centered point of view. Well, how could you do that? How can you be understanding of women who are, having abortions, when it's all about the sanctity of life, and I'm ostracized, you're not pro-life enough, or you're not pro-life, or you don't belong. That's a process of alarmist gatekeeping within that smaller community. And so, it happens on a broad scale and on smaller scales.
Okay, yeah, because, I share your concern about the way that pro-life people interact with others, especially other pro-life people. You related the story of someone in your book who had mentioned that she did not believe in abortion in the late term, and then someone else told her, then you're not really pro-choice. And that actually kind of struck me as a little odd, because I usually hear that from pro-life people. If you don't hold some view, then you're really not pro-life, you're pro-choice. Like if you think all abortions should be illegal except abortion in the case of rape, then you're not pro-life, or you're not, you're not. Then you're if you're pro-life with exceptions, then you're really just pro-choice, that kind of thing. In fact, I'm actually in a Facebook group called "Are You Even Pro-Life?", which pokes fun at the at this idea that if you don't believe something, then you're not really pro-life because of your belief. Because I think when pro-life people say stuff like that, they're really kind of shooting themselves in the foot, because considering that the culture is so pro-abortion, we need all the pro-life advocates and colleagues that we can get. And by telling people they're not pro-life if they're not a conservative Christian, or they're not pro-life if they hold certain very rare exceptions like rape, telling those people they're not really pro-life can actually have a detrimental effect, because it could push them away from the movement, instead of having them believe the belief that you want them to believe.
And, this is quite common across the board at the moment, that unless, and it's as though we can only be friends with or align ourselves with someone who shares every value exactly the same as me. So, right. As you said, unless you're, unless you frame your pro-lifeness within a Christian viewpoint or a Catholic viewpoint with no contraception allowed and no sex outside of marriage and all those things, then you can't possibly belong to our group. And you're right, we cut everyone off. But it seems to be becoming a bit of a cultural thing as well. It's a cultural thing of the left. Unless you believe every radical left idea, you're not left enough. So, there's a bit of a cultural shift to this concept. I can't actually imagine anything more boring than surrounding myself with people who just hold every the same value about me as everything. But there is this sense, I'm not greatly conservative on every issue. But I'm also not trying to align anywhere either. I'm not trying to belong to one of those communities. So the impact on me at this point of the attempts to push out are not great. But and I'm kind of at the later end of my career. But for people who are early starting, who are still trying to belong, it's a really serious issue where you have to be fully aligned on absolutely everything in a very particular way, or we disown you, is very, very damaging to any cause.
And so you mentioned that your next book that you're already working on is going to be on gate breaking, which from the sound of things, that's going to be kind of a follow-up to your Alarmist Gatekeeping book to show how we can kind of push back on this on the alarmist gatekeeping of the culture, or is there anything else maybe you could tell us about the book?
It is. So I'm going to actually start addressing some of these other areas that the theory might fit. I haven't done the data analysis, so I'm not saying it's a definite fit. But the feedback that I'm getting from other researchers where they're using the theory, so that it starts to kind of at least create a sense of critical thinking about some of these issues. And also looking at some of these ways in which we can start to address this. Historically, we've had, lots of times historically where there's been these, huge cultural shifts that, sometimes take a war or, something else to kind of break down. I'm not advocating that, but it is a huge, particularly at the moment on the issue of abortion. It's huge, and it takes numbers of people, and it takes lots of different strategies to begin breaking it down. But we do that one person at a time. So I am going to start addressing some of those things, but also having a look at how do these things develop, because we've seen it develop very quickly with gender ideology, for example. We've gone from no one's ever heard of it to now it's illegal. In my state of Victoria, it is illegal. You can be arrested and jailed for counselling someone who comes to you because they have a gender dysphoria, and they're a bit confused about it. The only thing you're allowed to do is affirm their gender dysphoria. You're not allowed to talk them out of it. Yeah. So we've gone from 0 to 100 in the blink of an eye. How does that happen? Particularly once it's legislated, because the other thing with legislating something, back to abortion. Once you legislate a safe access zone and that pro-life doctors must refer for abortion, it reinforces in the minds of the majority that there is something wrong with the people who stand outside abortion clinics, and something wrong that doctors who are pro-life can't be trusted, because now the law says they're criminals if they do that. Right. So it's the same with these other things. So, is this a huge cultural issue? What are the small things on a day-to-day basis that we can do? So I'm not going to try to propose the huge cultural thing that can happen. I'm not sure I have an answer for that. What I want to do is speak to individuals like you and like me and, like my neighbours about what are the small things that you can do to begin to create change, and how can your voices come together, because what we need is the power in numbers. So, it's about strategy for countering those things.
Yeah, well, we're coming up to the end of our time here together. Where can people follow your work?
I've got a personal blog at debbiegarratt.com, www.debbiegarratt.com. I've also got my Real Choices website is realchoices.org.au. I'm on Twitter at Debbie Garratt, on Facebook at Debbie Garratt, I think, as well. So, or Dr. Debbie Garratt on Facebook. Click like. I love to interact. Ask me any questions. Look forward to more of that.
Well, great. If you just sit tight for a moment, we can say our official goodbyes as soon as I end the broadcast here. My guest today has been Dr. Debbie Garratt. Be sure to pick up her book, Alarmist Gatekeeping, Abortion. You can find it on Amazon, and I'm sure other major booksellers as well. If you enjoyed the conversation today, be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to always be notified of when we have when we're going to go live. We actually do have we have an interview scheduled with Jacob Nels of Equal Rights Institute for next Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. He specializes in sidewalk counseling, so we're going to talk to him a bit about his experience there. If you like the discussion, be sure to share it around social media wherever you frequent. If you have the means and would like to become a financial supporter of our podcast, you can go to the Life Training Institute website at prolifetraining.com and click on the donate button in the drop-down menu. Be sure to put my name in the note section so LTI knows to put my name your donation into my account. You can also find us on Patreon. You can get some great perks there on Patreon if you'd like to support us there at patreon.com/prolifethinking. But again, the information here will always be free. This is never going to be behind a paywall. We just appreciate you coming to listen in, and we hope that you enjoy the discussions that we have and are able to find some more information and read some more books by great authors and thinkers that we have on the podcast. So we just appreciate you having us here. Once again, on behalf of the Pro-Life Thinking podcast, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.